the method for refuting the impossible way of existing of a self is known that we outlined here was the four-part refutation. Sometimes it's called the refutation based on the line of reasoning, neither one nor many. So 4 points: distinguishing the object to be refuted, understanding the logic, of neither one nor many, being convinced that it actually proves that there, how the logic works, and then, seeing neither one nor many, and then the conclusion, no such thing. Now, when we have refuted and cleared away this misconception, this projection of this coarse, impossible me, then, as we saw, you have to see what's left. And what's left is me, which is changing it's imputed on the aggregates and changing all the time, not static, and has parts. But then what automatically arises is the feeling, the grasping for a me that can be known self-sufficiently by itself without a basis, also being known simultaneously, either seen or thought about or heard or whatever. And on that basis, we also have automatically arising disturbing emotions. But the way that we refute that is exactly the same as the way in which we refuted the course, doctrinally based, impossible me. If that me that can be known by itself and the aggregates were totally identical, then when we see the dead, my dead body, somebody sees my dead body, then it would still be me. That's impossible. Or if the me is separate, can be known separately, that means if you separate out body, mind, and everything, there still should be left a me that you could know. And that's impossible. So, and then many examples are used. I'm just giving a sample of that. But it's the same type of logic that's used to refute this level of impossible me and the next level as well. That even though I realize that the self is imputedly knowable, can only be known with the basis of imputation appearing, well, either doctrinally based, I've been taught from another non-Prasangika Buddhist system, or it automatically arises that there's something on the side of the basis that makes me me, that allows me to, identify this as me. And based on thinking that that is me, a me established by those, the barcode I was using as a simple example of the name tag, sewn in the back of your neck, or your profile on Facebook, that is me. And then you say, well, again, the same discussion, is that identical to the aggregates or something separate from the aggregates? And similar lines of refutation. So the process of refuting is going to be the same. If we use just this one line of reasoning for refutation, there are, I think, 5 different Madhyamaka lines of reasoning that are used for refuting truly established existence, self-established existence, existence established from a findable characteristic mark. All of these are used as synonyms in the Geluk Prasangika system. So we need to not stop prematurely the refutation process. However, each step of deconstruction of what's impossible is beneficial and helpful, and does alleviate us of a certain amount of disturbing emotions and a certain amount of suffering. So it's not nonsense, it's necessary. Okay? So I think that's enough detail, without going into, tremendous detail about each of these deconstruction levels. But the meditation on voidness is the same. So you don't under-refute, to use Tsongkhapa's terms, of not going deeply enough, and you don't over-refute of saying that, there are no characteristic marks and anything could be anything. And actually there's nothing then. So that's over-refuting that there is no conventional me. And that impossible way of existing that is asserted with respect, by prasangika, of, something on the side of the object that establishes it on the side of the basis of imputation, findable in there, that either by its own power, Chittamatra would say that, or in conjunction with mental labelings, Svatantrika would assert that, establishes it as what it is. That also applies to all phenomena, not just the self. Whereas when we talk about the coarser levels of what's impossible about a person, that doesn't apply to all phenomena. So we get more and more subtle here. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the agent of the imputation?
The agent of the imputation, thank you, that's a very important point.
What does that mean?
The agent of imputation means the one who is doing the imputing. Imputation does not create anything. This is a misconception. That unless I label me, I don't exist. So that means you have to be constantly saying me in order to exist. So that's not the case. So me doesn't create, the mental label me does not create anything.
Doesn't it
So,
create suffering?
Pardon?
Doesn't it create suffering?
That makes you...
Doesn't it create suffering?
Doesn't it create... No, Buddha has mental labeling. Mental labeling of a Buddha, though, is very different from mental labeling of non-Buddhas, those with limited awareness. When you mentally label, I think I explained this yesterday or the day before, our ordinary type of mental labeling is with a category. Because it's with a category of me, or a category of, whatever, dog, then that also implies that things exist in a category, in a box, truly, established as being in that box. That is conceptual. Mental labeling in the case of anyone other than a Buddha is conceptual. Therefore, it implies truly established existence, that things truly exist in a box, and nothing exists in a box. And I use that example of there's a whole spectrum of emotions, and there are no boxes on it that divide it into this emotion and that emotion. And we have the convention love, or the convention loyalty, or whatever emotion. And it has been mentally labeled by a convention. Some people agreed. They gave it a definition. So that's mentally labeled. And it refers to something. But love was not created when somebody made up the word love and gave it a definition. was it? So the mental labeling process does not create anything. So when we talk about a true existence, this word existence, if we're looking in terms of, the deeper views, prasangika view, it's, since you seem to know Sanskrit, it's the word siddha. And siddha means established. So what establishes that there is love? How do you establish that there is such a thing as love? That's the question. And nothing is established as love from its own side. It's not as though there is the emotion love sitting somewhere with its own definition, and that establishes that there is such a thing as love. How do you establish that there is such a thing as love? Well, we have the concept love, we have the word love, and it refers to something. That's the only thing that establishes it. It is established merely by mental labeling. That's the only way that you can establish it, because you can't actually find it and find on its own side or on the side of a basis for labeling it anything that by its own power or together with the label makes it, establishes it as what it is. Are there defining characteristics? Sure. Conventionally, imputed on it. They're not findable there. But that mental labeling, things being established by mental labeling, establishes conventions, and because of conventions, then we can communicate with each other, and we assign words. We assign arbitrary sounds and call that a word. And then we have a category of that word, of the sound of the word, no matter what volume and what voice it's said in. We're able to fit it into the box of this word. And then we have a category of a meaning of the sound. And everybody will have a slightly different meaning, but we all fit it into the box of that's what the word love means. But things don't exist on the side of emotions in boxes with walls in between them. And on this side of the wall it's love, and on that side of the wall it's something else.
Yeah, as you said earlier, the imputation isn't the problem, but that we...
Pardon?
The imputation isn't the problem, but it's that we think it's real.
The imputation is not a problem, but our ordinary imputation, the problem is that, you have to be more precise when you say it. It's not that the imputation isn't real. We do impute, but it doesn't correspond to reality. Now, with a Buddha has mental labeling, but not through a category. A Buddha knows, a Buddha has to be, otherwise a Buddha doesn't know anything. A Buddha has, the 5 types of, they're called Buddha wisdoms, but deep awareness. And there is distinguishing, individualizing deep awareness. A Buddha knows this person has these, history and all these disturbing emotions, and if I teach this person this, I can lead them to liberation and enlightenment, and then that person. And so Buddha has individualizing deep awareness. So there's mental labeling, but it's not putting the person into a box. And what allows Buddha to communicate? Buddha communicates. But our ordinary mental labeling is with categories and boxes. So that category or box can establish something as what it is, or can be done without a category or a box to establish what it is. This is, mental continuum, and you have a number, what number it is. And in this particular lifetime, it has been given this name, and it has this particular body and, hardware. And then, the next lifetime, it's a completely different species and so on with a different name. But is able to individualize. And it's this continuum that is experiencing this sequence of cause and effect. Karma. Sequence of karma of me is not the sequence of karma of you. My happiness is not your happiness. You could, rejoice in my happiness and feel sympathetic happiness. That's something else. Okay? Yeah.
I don't know if it's too far away from the topic, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the connection between this and karma and the purification practice of Vajrasattva.
Between this and what we've been discussing and purification practice of Vajrasattva. Okay.
Because it seems it leads
Okay.
back to emptiness, all of it, in some way.
Okay. Now,
Can I ask a quick question about the 4-point refutation before we go?
can we ask a question about the 4-point refutation? Certainly.
Just before we go.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
I think I got the first 2 of the 4 points, but I wasn't clear on the last.
Okay, the 4 points. Recognize or distinguish the object to be refuted. Understand the logic, that's how you would refute it. Then do the actual neither one nor many. That's the 3rd step. And then the 4th step is come to the conclusion. No such thing.
I also interrupted his question, but elaborate on the agent. Sorry.
Oh, yes, so elaborate on the agent. So I was saying that no, I answered the question, basically, that there is no, the process of mental labeling, well, obviously there's no separate me from the whole process that is doing it. So the mental labeling, whether you are actively mental labeling or not, is irrelevant. Whether I am saying me or not doesn't matter. Somebody else is saying you doesn't matter. It doesn't create me or not. But, as I said, we establish, how do you establish that there is something that's mental labeling? So, a person who is mental labeling or a person who is talking and so on, that is just imputed on what is happening in that moment. So what is happening in that moment is, let's say, when we are actively mentally labeling someone, with a name or a word, or even without a word associated, like we had the example of the dog having the category of edibles, what is edible and what isn't edible, so the box. Then there is a cognition of a mental cognition, let's say, in which there is a category, which is this is the Galupa Prasangika explanation. There are many other explanations of how cognition works in Buddhism. But the appearing object is the category. Then there's a specifier, there's nothing other than, and then there's something that represents it. So what represents an edible for the dog is food. That's what appears. Of course, the category doesn't have any appearance. So that's all that's happening. Right? With distinguishing and feeling happy because, there's food and perhaps some greed that is there. So many mental factors in that one moment when the dog is distinguishing food through the category edible. And the individual, the person, how do you translate it? The individual, the self of the dog, well, the dog is doing this. So it can be labeled on it. Is there a dog that's separate from this? No. Is the dog the same as the mind? No. But you can impute a dog on this moment of mental labeling, of thinking, this dog, this is food, and acting on it. So there's no separate agent.
What I really asked is it the void that looks upon itself
Is it the void that
Yeah.
looks upon itself?
and creates this kind of bardo body that
No.
it does the imputing,
No, the void doesn't do anything.
but we emerge from the void?
Do we emerge from the void? No.
No?
No.
Okay.
That also in Tantra sadhanas is a mistranslation, which says, out of voidness I arise as, it's not out of. It is within the understanding of voidness, within the sphere of voidness I arise. It's not like, there's a me sitting inside, the voidness, and now it comes out on stage, is back, off stage, and now it comes on stage. It's not like that. Void isn't doing anything. It's just talking about what we imagine to exist, the things that I imagine, the impossible way of existing that I imagine things have. There is a total absence of a referent thing that corresponds to that, or a referent object even. It's not referring to anything real. That's what is totally absent. So within the sphere of there being no findable referent things, everything appears. It's not out of that. It's not some place or anything like
It
that.
appears to whom?
Pardon? To whom? You can label me on top of it. I'm experiencing that. I mean, it doesn't happen by itself. It's not as though it's not like out of the Big Bang, then everything appears. It's not like that. You can only talk about, an agent in relation to, a knower in relation to something that is known. We have several questions that are pending. So let us go to the next question, which is about purification, which is not a simple question. You're not going to get a simple answer here. We have these tendencies, right? These karmic tendencies that, there's tendencies can give rise to many different types of karmic tendencies, can give rise to many different results. It's the ripened result of more aggregates, body, mind, happy, unhappy. There are results that are similar to their cause in terms of our experience, results that are similar to the result, similar to the cause in terms of our habits, our conduct. So you repeat the action. The one before that was things happening, getting into experiencing others doing those things to us. And then there are the comprehensive results of experiencing, something more general in terms of the environment or the society and so on that we are born into or go to. So there are all these different types of results from a tendency. And some tendencies will give stronger results, some will give weaker results. There are many factors which affect it. And some will give just, results one time, some will give results many times, and so on. So you apply opponent forces. First, acknowledging that, what I did was mistaken. It wasn't that I was bad. that was mistaken, based on unawareness or ignorance. Then you feel regret, which is not guilt. Guilt is, identifying a solid me that was so bad, what I did was so bad, and not letting go. Holding on to that. I'm bad. What I did was so bad. And you feel horrible. It's guilt. Regret is just, I wish I hadn't done that. Like you eat bad food, food that made you sick. I wish I hadn't done that. I regret that. It's not that I'm bad because I ate it. Then there is going to try my best not to repeat it. And then I reaffirm the positive direction that I'm going in life. Either refuge, safe and sound direction, working toward a true stopping and a true, pathway mind, a true understanding that'll bring about stopping of suffering. That's the direction I'm going in. Or reaffirm bodhicitta on top of that. I'm working toward enlightenment to be able to benefit everybody. And then you apply some counteracting opponent force. So there's Vajrasattva visualization, which you actually graphically imagine that all the negativity leaves us. And it's very important, as my teacher Serkun Rinpoche pointed out, to imagine that we have done every possible negative thing whatsoever and purify all of that. Because if we've had beginningless rebirth, no beginning, at some time we've done every possible destructive action. So you want to have a full, purification, not just of, well, I said something cruel to this person or, like that. Although it is important to go through as much as possible the mistaken things, destructive things that we can remember, but make it larger. Okay, now, if it is done perfectly, which means with total concentration and total, sincerity and always being mindful of the four opponents and so on. So that's pretty difficult. It's not just going blah, 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 say the magic words 100,000 times and you're purified. So that's really quite difficult to do it properly. But if you do it properly, then those tendencies will not ripen into those types of suffering. And but that doesn't mean that you won't develop more destructive behavior. It just means that those ones won't ripen into the type of results that they could. But you could very easily develop in the future, more destructive behavior. So it's just sort of wiping the slate clean temporarily. So what you have to do is gain the understanding of voidness. Gain the understanding of voidness, then you no longer will have that thirsting or the obtainer attitudes or emotions, disturbing ones, that will act as the trigger to ripen these karmic tendencies. So if those tendencies can no longer give a result because you have gotten rid of what would cause them to become activated, you've gotten rid of those activators through the understanding of voidness, then something cannot exist as a cause if there can be no result from it. Cause and result are relative to each other, right? Something can't give a result, it can't be a cause anymore. So now that tendency is deactivated. So the image that's used in the sutras and texts is like a burnt seed. So much more than just, doing through Vajrasattva meditation, although Vajrasattva meditation will also burn it, but you've gone, much deeper when you get rid of what could ripen it. But then, Tsongkhapa explains that that burnt seed, that deactivated tendency, can still be imputed on your mental continuum. And it's not gotten rid of until unless you have the non-conceptual cognition of voidness and you gain liberation. So then, what happens is that terminology becomes very important here. There's a word tendency, there's a word habit. That word habit can be quite specific in its meaning, or it can also be used as a general word for tendency as well, and potential also. So now, what are the karmic habits? And the habits of karma, what result do they give? And their effect is that it is limiting. It limits your awareness. So it's only when you actually attain Buddhahood that you really totally get rid of those burnt karmic tendencies. So they're still considered the obscurations of karma, because they're still functioning to prevent the mind from being omniscient. So in that sense, they no longer can function as a cause for, further rebirth. The usual karmic results, but they can still function as a cause for having limited cognition, limited mind. So it's only when you, attain through the force of the understanding of voidness. Now, this is the Prasangika view, being, it's the same understanding of voidness, but it has this super strong energy behind it of bodhicitta, and you have been building it up for, eons. So it's whittling it down, layers and layers and layers of obscuration. So it's purification, not a simple process. Okay? You had a question?
Yeah, I'll try. Just when you said within the thinking on tantric practices, and you said within the understanding of voidness, I arise as, and so forth.
Right.
An image.
Right. It's not within the understanding of, within voidness.
Or can it be, because once I heard this that made a little more sense, but now when you just said this phrase, did another click, a note that said she didn't like the other translation, like from voidness something arises. She said, I like more to use while void.
Well,
So-
while void or within void, within the sphere of voidness means the same.
And can we see that then to it just made a click now? Can I use that phrase if it clicks with my understanding? Is that the way we exist?
Can you-
While void, we are here.
That's right. While being devoid of impossible ways of existing, we do exist in what is possible.
So while void, we are here right now.
While, yeah. Right, thank God. To hold him responsible. Yes, two truths. Two truths are simultaneous, both valid. within, their own sphere. Conventionally, how, what actually, the extent of what exists, and the deepest truth, how it exists. So, we exist. How do you establish that we exist? It's merely in terms of mental labeling. There's no other way of establishing that we exist, or proving that we exist. And we are devoid of impossible ways, because if we existed in possible ways, we couldn't actually conventionally exist and do anything. We'd all be, stiff robots encapsulated in plastic. Everything would be like that. Nothing could interact. Nothing could do anything. It would be like in a child's coloring book. Big lines around everything, establishing itself. Yeah.
Accord with what he said and what I asked earlier. I was referring within the Nyingma system that you, with the how you have Samantabhadra and Samantabhadri, awareness and emptiness, and how I imagine that awareness is looking into emptiness and creating this body, and this body, in a sense, is doing a secondary imputation into the void. This is.
I'm sorry, but again, to start bringing in within the Nyingma system, then there is Samantabhadra awareness, and then generation of Samantabhadra, and so on. You're bringing in a totally different system, and there is no way to start explaining that without giving an enormous amount of background information about the Nyingma system. So just stay within one system, and don't try to put a piece of a different puzzle into this puzzle. Doesn't fit. Nyingma explanation is perfectly valid, perfectly helpful. You can attain liberation and enlightenment with it, but it is a different system. And it's a holistic system, just as the Gelugpa one is a holistic system. You can't just understand one little piece of it without getting the whole thing, which means you have to understand cognition theory within each of these systems, which is explained quite differently in the various systems. How does basic cognition work? How do we know anything? So, please don't always try to mix things. Yeah.
Would it help me, it's what I'm trying to reflect right now, about while void, and see, I'm existing in this body and talking right now, while void, thinking of it maybe as space or as
Well, space, no. While, or, let me think. We are using a in Sanskrit grammar, pardon me, but in Sanskrit grammar, you have a certain case. It's called the ablative case, which can be understood or translated to be from, but it can also be translated and covers because of. Because of voidness, I arise. If we want to be really quite literal. Because there is an absence of impossible ways of existing, then within that or while that I can arise. Only because there is an absence of impossible ways of existing. The reason why, this is, that dependent arising is, when Tsongkhapa says, when you understand dependent arising in terms of voidness and voidness in terms of dependent arising meaning in mental labeling.
What's the difference between dependent arising and voidness?
What's the difference between dependent arising and voidness? Dependent arising, There are many different meanings of dependent arising. There's the 12 links of dependent arising, which is talking about how samsara, uncontrollably recurring rebirth, arises dependently on this whole sequence of 12 links. One meaning. Now, the other meanings of dependent arising, that things depend on causes and conditions. Nothing will arise,
That's the one I meant.
you know,
Yeah.
independently of causes and conditions. That is only for non-static phenomenon, things that change. Then you have dependent arising on parts. That covers both static and non-static phenomenon. There are some that are static. Category is static, it doesn't change. It didn't grow out of anything. As long as you can substitute one category for another, but a category itself is static. Dog. The category dog, it doesn't do anything. It's just a category.
But it's still
Doesn't
a category
change.
that gets changed all the time.
You could replace it, but it doesn't grow into another category like a plant.
But we could decide in 100 years.
We could decide
Animals
something
or
else, and you could replace it.
a god. We could decide it was a
Right,
god.
you could replace it. Okay, so, but all phenomenon arise dependently on parts. That's another meaning of dependent arising. But the deepest meaning of dependent arising, when they speak in terms of understanding voidness in terms of dependent arising, is things arise dependently on mental labeling. And that's why I explained it. That doesn't mean that things are created by mental labeling. It's talking about how you establish something. And the only way that you can establish something is dependent on mental label. It is what you have a label, you have a basis for labeling, and what the label refers to. So I have the label me, which I can assign a word to. And there's the basis, the aggregates. What is the me? The me is not the aggregates. The me is not the word me or the label me. What is the me? The me is what the label refers to on the basis of the aggregates. Can you find it? No, it's like an illusion. So there is a referent object, but there's no referent thing, an actual me sitting inside my body or mind. Although it might give the appearance that it is a thing. These are two different words in Tibetan. Referent object and referent thing. So what is void, what is total absence, is a referent thing. There's no findable thing that is backing up, like holding up a piece of scenery in a theater. You know, the back, you know, the prop, the back, well, what's holding up the backdrop? That's the word that's used. There's no such thing. Nothing is holding it up behind it. It's only from the side of the mind that you can establish something in terms of mental labeling. That doesn't mean that everything is existing in your head, in your mind. It certainly doesn't mean that. Just talking about how do you establish something? That there is a me. It's only in terms of what the label me refers to. And what is absent is an actual referent thing, a box, findable on the side of the basis. So because of dependent arising, because things are established merely by mental labeling, there's a voidness, there's a void of a referent thing. So because of dependent arising, voidness, because of voidness, then everything is established by dependent arising, by mental labeling. So you understand the two, and only when the mind is unlimited as a Buddha can the two appear simultaneously. So that's omniscience. Before that, whatever appears is going to appear truly existent, even though you know this is ridiculous. doesn't correspond to reality if you're liberated, if you're an arhat.
Can you say that again? Because of voidness?
Because voidness, you understand, you know, the line of reasoning for understanding voidness, the deepest one is dependent arising. Because things can only be established by mental labeling, in terms of mental labeling, which, as I said, you don't create them by mental labeling. Therefore, they are devoid of something, you know, establishing it from its own side. That's voidness. So you have to understand dependent arising and mental labeling correctly, precisely, in order to, you know, I mean, a different understanding of mental labeling will establish, you know, demonstrate a different understanding of voidness. So you have to understand the deepest one, so, you know, don't under-refute. Complicated, I'm sorry. Well, that's why, as I said, in order to understand it, you have to somehow get rid of your mental blocks. And what gets rid of mental blocks? There are emotional obscurations, cognitive obscurations. These are blocks, building up a lot of positive force so that you become more open, so that your mind relaxes and it's not this, oh, I can't understand, me, I can't understand. So that's what they say. It's not that, you know, you have to collect points and then you'll win and get the understanding. Yeah. And it's a phase, remember I used the analogy of a phase transition. Put enough energy into the system and water will, you know, turn to steam.
I have this, you know, I think it's really complicated and I certainly don't understand all of this, but at least if I understand something, I'm happy. But I have this idea that somehow it's really, really simple.
Right, it is really, although it is complicated,
Yeah.
life is complicated, so what do you expect? So although it's complicated, when you understand it, it is fairly obvious. You know, it's simple. You know, that's when you can perceive it straightforwardly, then it's obvious. But it's not actually something obvious, it's something quite obscure. Because things don't appear that way. Our mind, because of the habits of believing all of this, projects it. That is the real problem, that we are constantly projecting every moment of our, you know, limited existence. This impossible way of existing. Yeah.
I have a question related to what you said about kind of building positive energy and then the mind can become more flexible for as a scholar, what has been your experience in terms of learning and actually realization? I feel like for me, not that I've realized anything, but even the momentary, tiny little things, it doesn't seem directly related to.
Okay, is it, how do we relate in my own experience personally? Understanding, let's not call it realization, but just, you know, understanding something and this whole process of building up positive force. I've always found, in my experience, well, first of all, when I don't understand something, I, on the wall, in front of my desk, I have a tanka of a Tibetan painting, scroll painting of Manjushri that His Holiness Dalai Lama gave me. So it's quite a special thing. It's signed. And I focus on that, or if I'm not there, you know, I imagine Manjushri, and I do quite specific visualization with mantra recitation of Manjushri mantra. And not that these are magic words or anything like that, but it helps to focus. You know, when you are confused and I don't understand, your mind is not very focused. And the mantra and this quite strong visualization gets you very focused with a very, you really are going to, try to be clear. Something like that. So that's first method. But actually, during my life, well, I would be writing a book or something like that while I was living in India. Then I would go on what I would call a bodhicitta retreat. And a bodhicitta retreat for me was going on a world tour lecturing. And going on that world tour and lecturing, it built up a lot of positive force because I was lecturing and helping people. I wasn't just, being a hippie going around traveling. And then when I would come back, I would find that, because of, at least on some level, tried to help people, that it built up enough positive force that then my mind was much clearer and I could write with much more understanding. And nowadays, what I find is with my website, which is reaching so many people, nowadays we are reaching, we have an average of 5,200 visits a day to the website. It's an awful lot of people looking at it and reading it, and hopefully some benefiting from it.
How many, excuse me?
5,200 a day on average this month.
Yes.
So this year already 1.25 million visits to the website. So that's building up a lot of positive force. And I find that I am able to understand things much more quickly, things that I didn't understand before. And I can only attribute that to the buildup of positive force. I'm 68, almost 69. For most people that age, you start to forget. You don't get more, insight. You lose. But I find that I'm understanding more and more. So I firmly believe in, that it is correct and true that you need to build up this positive force.
Is that what you call merit also?
That's what's called merit, but I don't, merit implies merit badge, you get points, and, at the end you have a little badge that you wear here. That's a more childish way of understanding it. It's building up a network, putting a charge in a battery so that you get more and more energy, break through more and more mental blocks and emotional blocks. Yeah.
Haven't you also been studying and reading and writing about this?
Well, also I have been studying Buddhism for the last 50 years.
It would make sense that you...
So it would make sense that yes, but it could also, that you forget more as well. But yes, I've been at it for 50 years.
So if you get better at it...
So, that also is building up positive force, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm just saying you could also explain it without the website.
You could explain it without the website. So it's just a matter of intensity.
Okay.
Focus. So, anyway, you asked my personal experience. That's how I conceive of it. And so I find it very, very worthwhile. But if I really want to benefit people, I have to do a lot of positive things. And if I really want to benefit them, I have to understand more deeply. Anyway. Yeah.
Could you recommend a very short 1 or 2 books that we could read for this topic?
Can I recommend 1 or 2 books that we could read for this topic? I would recommend, I'm sorry,
Okay, good.
but my website, there's plenty of stuff on it on voidness.
Okay.
So in Fundamentals of Tibetan Buddhism, that section, level 2 is Lamrim. Within Lamrim, there's the advanced scope section. Within the advanced scope section, there's a section on voidness. You start there. And then level 4, more, advanced explanations within that. Not level 4, level 5. You'll find that there are, various articles on the two truths and on voidness and on the four tenet systems and so on. So you start with a more basic presentation, and then you go to the more advanced. And within the menu, they are listed in a particular order, so that number 1, then number 2, then number 3, like that. So I would recommend that. I'm prejudiced. So, I think that perhaps this is an appropriate place to ask for more questions. Got me. I wasn't quick enough.
No, but I wanted to hear if you had the refutation of the Western materialist view of. I find it interesting because
the refutation of the Western materialist view of
a merely labeled self that is terminated with the body and mind.
A merely labeled self that is terminated with a body and a mind. Is there a refutation of that? The refutation of that has to do with the basis for labeling me. The basis for labeling me are moments of mental activity, right? Mental continuum. So remember, we had the definition of mental activity. Mere clarity and awareness is how it's usually defined, and those have to be understood as verbs. It's an activity. So clarity does not mean focus. It means the arising of something so that it becomes clear, so that the way in which, another word given for it is the rising, the verb for the rising of the sun. So the arising of a mental hologram, a mental representation, is usually translated as aspect, but what is it talking about? It's talking about a mental hologram. Rising of a mental hologram. Western way of saying, all the photons and stuff like that, and then electrical impulses and chemical impulses in the brain, and then, there's a mental hologram. That's what you see. And represents something external. And that is what it means to know something. So awareness is, a knowing in some way or another. The arising of a hologram and the way of engaging, cognitively engaging, that's descriptions of the same phenomenon, 2 descriptions. And of course you can have a physical description of it as well. Physical basis as another description of the same thing. And mere just means that there is no separate me that is observing it, watching it, or identical with it, for that matter, our refutation. So now, that conventional nature, and it's devoid of existing in any impossible way, so the deepest nature, but if you talk about the conventional nature, changing moment to moment to moment, it's non-static. There are 2 types of non-static phenomenon. It's non-static because in each moment we are aware of something else. When you hear in Nyingma and Kagyu texts that it is permanent, remember that word that's translated as permanent can mean either eternal or unaffected by anything. So they're saying it's eternal, has no beginning and no end, which Gelugpa will totally agree. However, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about that and its nature is not created by anything. So fine, we agree with that. But it knows something, differently, moment to moment to moment. So from that point of view, it changes. Its nature doesn't change. Its content changes. So we have that. So there's 2 types of non-static phenomenon. One that is subject to subtle impermanence. Gross impermanence and subtle impermanence. In the sense that gross impermanence is that it will come to an end. Subtle impermanence is that it is going slowly, slowly toward its end. Degenerating, like our body is degenerating. And it's eventually going to come to an end. Why? Because it was brought about by causes and conditions. And the causes and conditions which brought it about change. They don't remain constant. So why does your computer break? It broke because it was manufactured. And the conditions and circumstances of manufacturing it aren't renewed every moment. And because they're not renewed every moment, it is slowly falling apart. So that's subtle impermanence. You know, why do you die? Because you were born. You know, why does our relationship end? Because we met, which is created from something else, and then the causes and circumstances that create it are no longer operating, so it degenerates. So it's constantly renewed moment to moment to moment. So because of that, it doesn't make any sense that it comes from nothing and that it will come to an end without producing another moment. So there is a certain energy which is involved with this mental activity. There's another two ways of looking at things, and there is that subtle energy. So whether you want to call it subtle electrical energy or subtle, who knows what, it's not dependent on the gross physical body. Gross physical body can be a support for it. But don't think of it as an Atman coming in from outside and going into it and then going somewhere else. It's imputed on it. So because of that, the whole understanding of cause and effect of something that doesn't degenerate, you demonstrate that there is no end and no beginning to the mental continuum. Therefore, there's no end or beginning of the self that's imputed on the mental continuum. So that's a discussion. Not a simple discussion, but that is the discussion. And it becomes very relevant, when you think in terms of abortion. Wonderful topic to understand this, because that's saying that up to a certain point, this being is nothing. And now the nothing turns into a something. How can a nothing turn into a something? And there's a whole, discussion that you have in all the Madhyamaka texts of it's impossible for a nothing to turn into a something. Pardon? Nothing. Yeah, nothing. So that is, it's not that there is no, all of a sudden a mental continuum comes out of nowhere. It's a completely different discussion as to when does that mental continuum, join with that basis. That's a completely different discussion. But to conceive of a nothing becoming a something makes absolutely no sense. When does it become a something? How does it become a something? What's the boundary and what is the process of a nothing becoming a something? Pardon?
Ex nihilo nihilo est.
Ex nihilo, yes, from nothing exist. Anything else? So, I've completely exhausted you. Wonderful. That is like my aunt at a family meal. It was a total success when nobody could get up from the table. It was so full that nobody could move. Then it was a success. So if nobody can ask any more questions, and you're so full, then you could sit there and try to digest. So let's end with a final dedication. We think whatever understanding, whatever positive force has come from this may go deeper and deeper and act as a cause for everyone to achieve liberation and enlightenment for the benefit of everyone.